There are all sorts of excited fans in the chat, and understandably so, predicting 11-1. When is the last time that you went into a season with this football team, both based on your perspective and what you're seeing out of the fans and their optimism, that there was that lofty of a record expectation?
Well, I think from me, and this is probably some bias speaking, I think 2016 was a year where we were all coming off the high of 12-0. And yes, they lost last second touchdown from LJ Scott and Michigan State in the Big Ten Championship game and got blitzkrieged by Stanford in the Rose Bowl. But Mark, when you go 12-0 and then you return Desmond King and CJ Beathard and George Kittle and all those guys, there was serious expectation. That's why 2016 was such a disappointment. They followed it up, or finished it out, I should say, by getting blown out by Florida, game I was at as well. So I'd say 2016. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at what I predicted. I probably predicted at least 10-2 in 2016. Now you'll recall this, Mark, that last year's schedule was very favorable, and Iowa was going into the year with, we expected a much better quarterback situation in Cade McNamara before he went down, a really solid tight end group in Eric All and Luke Lachey. Both those guys go down. So, I think obviously in hindsight, it was more dependent on health because, in my opinion, Iowa had a quarterbacks coach and an offensive coordinator that was very much going to be hamstrung if anything bad happened. And football is a game where bad things from an injury standpoint do happen. And so you lose maybe your three best players on offense. Cade may not be one of your best players, but he's probably your most important player last year on that offense. And then Eric All and Luke Lachey are probably your two best offensive players. So that really hurt them, and they just weren't able to overcome it. But I don't remember what I predicted last. I'm guessing I predicted 10-2 last year. I'd have to go back. Do you remember those conversations that you and I had? I think I predicted 10-2 last year.
I'm pretty sure I predicted 9-3 and a tie with Wisconsin at the top, and I don't remember who I picked to win the game.
Yeah. I think I picked 10-2. I have not come out with my predictions so far this year. I'm guessing you have not either. But I've said it before. I think it's really hard to expect 11-1 because, especially when it would be different, Mark, if you had 10 games that were extremely winnable and then 2 games against difficult opponents. But they've got 11 games that are extremely winnable and then 1 game against someone that basically nobody thinks they have a shot against. And that's probably unfair. I know you're a Buckeye at heart. You probably scoff at that and think, well, that's a trap game for
we've
Ohio
had that
State
discussion, and I said that I think I was being discredited, and I think it could be a game. Now, would I be surprised if Ohio State won 38-10? No, I just think that they're that talented, but I don't expect that, and I would not be surprised if Iowa won the game.
I think, and I'm going to be coming out with my positional rankings on the defensive side tomorrow. So people want to, I'm sorry, Thursday. I'll tell everybody this, just making a little announcement on the show, Mark. I've got Coach Patterson coming on with me live tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Central Time. So we'll have a live edition of Hawkeye Hangout at first day of fall camp. And so we'll be taking questions and chats and whatnot. So that will be fun. And then Thursday, I'll be coming out with a podcast with my positional rankings on defense. I did that for offense last month. But the reason I bring that up is when I rank, I haven't done it yet, but when I go through and rank the positions on defense, corner will still probably be at the bottom. It'll be between corner and defensive line. I don't think there's much of any debate there. So against Ohio State, now I know they lost Marvin Harrison Jr. They've lost so much talent at wideout. You and I both know that. I know it's a different offense to some extent with Chip Kelly. But I just see this and I think that's a bad matchup for Iowa. Even if Iowa is solid everywhere else, the one position that traditionally Ohio State burns you at time and time and time again is wide receiver. And, to think that Iowa was pretty strong at receiver 2 years ago and still got killed by guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., that says something. Now, we don't know what Will Howard is going to do. It sounds like maybe Ohio State's stronger on the ground. I don't know how that's going to affect. Yeah, I mean, obviously that offense is projected to be probably the best in the country, but they've got maybe 2 of the top 5 running backs in the country. Is that fair to maybe surmise?
I see some All-America teams. Now, this is a bit ridiculous because if they share too many carries, they're not going to have the
Yeah.
stats to justify it. But if you're just saying we believe that these are the best players, regardless of how much the stats add up, I see multiple publications that have their running backs first and second team All-American.
So that's the question then, Mark. Like, it depends potentially. We're projecting this forward a lot of season until we get there. But that Ohio State game, like, what's the game plan? What's the approach from Ohio State heading into that game? Because if they get to that game and they've just been able to run all over everybody, Mark, and they approach that game that way, that would be the little bit of hope, the sliver of hope for Iowa that I'd be looking at and saying, hey, these guys are a little bit overconfident with this rushing attack. And what does Iowa do best? They stop the run. And what do they have? What position are they strongest at? It's maybe not the defensive line as a whole, but they got 2 really good interior guys and a couple of linebackers who find the football. So I think that would be my big thing. How do they approach the game? Game plan will be a very interesting conversation leading into Iowa, Ohio State.
Yeah. Ohio State's really tricky because, they've got 2 of the best running backs in the country. They're loaded at wide receiver, although they're inexperienced after Emeka Egbuka. They are loaded with talent, but they only have about 25 catches coming back from the rest of those guys. They're all
and so but there's an example. There's one you brought up earlier, the conversation about Jamari Harris. Is Iowa comfortable letting Jamari Harris kind of shadow? I mean, we'll see what these other I'm sure it'll all depend on what John Nestor and Deshaun Lee and those guys look like in fall camp and first month of the season. But is Phil going to be comfortable letting Jamari Harris live on an island with Egbuka? Because he is the clear guy. They don't, maybe that's the one chink in the armor, although they got tons of talent. It seems like for the last how many years, it's either been Harrison or it's been Fleming or it's been what's his face who was hurt, Smith and Jigba.
Sure, yeah.
So now maybe there's some question marks there, but my guess is Ryan Day and company will figure out, who the next guy is after Egbuka within the first month of the season.
Yeah. Well, they do have the number 1 player in the country coming in, Jeremiah Smith, who it's a lot to put on a true freshman, but the players were saying at Big Ten Media Days last week, like this is ridiculous how good this guy is.
Yeah. Ed Rogers says, J.J. Smith is starting as a freshman. You can't check him. I'm guessing Ed Rogers is an Ohio State fan. Is that right, Mark?
He is. No, he's not too far off, but that's hyperbole. The guy's never played, never caught a pass, but yeah, it should be quite the affair in Columbus. Absolutely. When you bring up predictions, I just internally think, for me, looking at the national scene and the Big Ten related, I just have to determine is Will Howard going to be good enough to get it all done? Because I think that's what it's going to come down to for that team.